Hey everybody, Andy here with Addictive Archery. Welcome to episode 10. We are going to be talking about feather fletching. And no, we are not going to hurt any chickens in the making of this video. But yeah, we're going to talk about left wing and right wing. Does it matter? Is it going to affect the way your arrow flies? 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch, how do we know what size to go with? And I'll show you my method for putting on the feathers onto the arrows, and actually 3 different styles of fletching jigs. So stay tuned. I'm glad she was nice. Okay, I was having a little fun on the intro. For those of you who don't know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and a while back I was listening to the Gritty Bowman, and they were talking about feathers. And Aaron Snyder at the time was really new to traditional archery, and there was a comment made that maybe the arrow fletching was made out of chicken feathers. Of course, now we know that they're not. They're made out of turkey, but I couldn't resist. I want to say one thing, though. I want to thank Aaron for putting himself out there and being able to make those mistakes there publicly. I think he's doing a lot of good for traditional archery. I've seen a huge uptick in the new to traditional guys coming over that have been shooting compounds and are just looking for a little bit more of a challenge and trying to revive that the feeling that you get from shooting a stick bow. So thanks for doing that. For those of you that haven't discovered podcasts, they're a great way to learn about traditional archery and really about any subject. There's podcasts out there that cover everything, and they're a lot of fun to listen to. I listen to them quite often here in the shop. I'll have them playing in the background and stuff. Gritty Bowman's a good one. Aaron now has his own called Kafaru Cast. That's a good one to listen to. He talks a lot about backpacking and hunting, and he's talking about his traditional archery a little bit as he's starting to pick up the stick bow again for this year. And then my favorite, of course, is the TradQuest podcast. Those are my friends Robert and James. That's an all-traditional bow hunting podcast. It's a good one to listen to. So if you haven't discovered those out, give them a try, give them a look. There's usually an application on most of the smartphones now these days. So, getting back to the feather fletching, they are made out of turkey. A lot of your commercial ones. This last year, we grew some of our own here on the farm. Here are the feathers from them when we took them in to get butchered. I actually asked the place to give me the feathers. The feathers on the arrows are made out of the primaries, out of the wings. And so one of the questions that was asked is, how do you tell the difference between a right wing and a left wing? And it truly does, when we talk right and left wing, we're talking about the actual wings on the turkeys. So the way I tell, and there's a lot of different ways of doing this, these are the natural wings, and you always want to pretend that you're grabbing the turkey from behind, okay? So these would actually go in there. And if I were to turn around, if I can get that shot, and you were to grab the turkey, this is going to be your right wing, this is going to be your left wing, okay? So it's going to be opposite now that I'm towards you. But the way I tell, a little easier to explain when you get them, this is a full-length feather. These are also turkey. What they are they're the white turkeys that are in the big factories for slaughter. They then dye them different colors, and you can get feathers in all different shades of colors, which is nice for us because we can make our ends of our arrows nice and bright and see where our shots are going, especially when we're shooting at low light conditions when we're hunting. These feathers have had the quill, and I'll make another video on how to do this, but basically what you do is you split the quill down in half, and then you grind it down so it's thin enough to glue onto your arrow. That's what these are. So the way you tell once they're at this state is you'll see how this is rounded again, okay? And this is the part that goes down towards the point of the arrow. It's the way the feather lays. So this is a right-handed feather. So as you're looking at it from the back, so if you were to grab the arrow from the knock end, and I'll show you. If you grab your arrow, look down the knock, look the way it's turned, okay? This is a right-handed feather, or a right wing feather. It has a right helical. The feathers, the actual feather is coming off of the right hand of the quill. There's more quill on the left hand side. It's kind of hard to explain without really showing it to you, but let me grab a left hand full length real quick and I'll show you. So now we have two full length feathers. We have a right hand and a left hand. And again, if you look down the back of the feather, or the side of the feather that would go towards your knock, the feather here comes off of one side of the quill. If it's coming off the right side, that's a right wing. If it's coming off the left side, that's a left wing. And again, you can see how they curve. And so if you're picking the turkey up or the bird up from the back, so the bird is looking away from you and you hold on to it, that's how you can tell. Right wing, left wing, okay? So now the big question is does it matter? We were always told, at least I was when I was growing up, and you're shooting, if you're a right-handed shooter, you wanted to shoot a left wing feather. The thought there was that the feather, when you would shoot it, it would spin away from your riser and clear your bow. Well, now we know through high-speed cameras and stuff that there's actually a paradox, and that arrow, if it's tuned right, will paradox around your arrow shelf and never contact that shelf to start with. So it really does not matter. It does matter when you go to use your fletching jig. If you buy a bunch of right helical clamps, you want to stay with a right wing feather. It's made to put a helical on this feather. So a right wing feather, right wing clamp. You can see it'll twist that feather onto the arrow and make it spin quicker. I like fletching with the helical. I think you have a better performing arrow. It'll recover from paradox quicker and it's a lot more forgiving. Now, if I were to put left wing feather, right helical clamp, it tends to fight itself. It doesn't want to lay in there. And when you put it in there and you see it just doesn't go right. Okay, so what size of feather do we want to use? Feathers these days can be bought in 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, and 5.5. Those are all pretty common sizes available for most feather manufacturers. But what size do we choose? It depends on what you're going to do with the arrow. For most of my little kid shafts, I'll put a 3-inch feather on there. This is more than enough to stabilize an arrow coming out of a lower poundage bow for little kids. The other thing with the kid's bow is the brace height on the bow, so that's the distance between the handle and the string, is not very big most times because their bows are 48 inches or less. So you need to have a shorter feather on there because of the brace height not being that big. The other time I'll use a 3-inch feather is when I'm fletching arrows for outdoor tournament shooters. Folks that are shooting 40 pounds or less, they're not shooting broadheads, they're shooting field points, and they need to be able to shoot out to 80 meters. They're usually shooting a lower weight arrow. The 3-inch 3-fletch is more than enough feather for them to stabilize. The other advantage to a smaller feather is they're not as susceptible to a crosswind. So in other words, if you're shooting outdoors and the breeze is kind of going across your shooting lane, they'll pick up a little bit of that crosswind, but if they're shooting at a helical, they'll be able to spin through that well enough without really getting blown around. And you really see that effect as you start climbing in feather size, both in length and height. The next most common size that I use here in the shop is a 4-inch. I use 4-inch on a lot of the skinnier shafts. So if I'm doing a 5/16 shaft or if I'm doing a skinny carbon shaft, I'll use a 4-inch feather. The advantage of this, again, if you're shooting a bow with a lower brace, I say you're shooting a self bow, you need to drop down in feather size because of there not being that much distance between the string and the riser, especially like on a self bow. Now if you need more feather, say you're shooting a wider broadhead. Some of those broadheads now are pushing 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches on some of the really big ones. You need more feather in the back to steer them. The way to get more feather here is on a 4-inch, you can see this is a 4-fletched arrow. So basically there's 16 inches of feather back here on the arrow. Some people would consider that either a whole or a half chicken, is what I've been hearing some folks call it. So if you need more feather in the back, you feel like you need a little bit more steering and guidance to get that arrow to straighten out from paradox quicker, you can add another feather. But really, I find here personally, my hunting arrow is a 4-inch high back parabolic. So these parabolics on the back, their standard is about 5/8 of an inch from the base of the quill to the top of the feather here. My arrows, I use a feather burner. I can customize them. I make just a little bit higher back. I like the looks of them, and I feel that they're a little bit more forgiving. If I happen to jerk the shot, or I don't get a clean release because I'm excited, or under pressure I screw up, I think that they perform a little better for me, so that's what I've personally gone to. The most common size for me to fletch on a wood arrow of 11/16 or 23/64 is a 5-inch. A 5-inch feather has been the standard for a long time. In fact, a lot of the plastic vanes back in the old days when I was fletching arrows on the aluminums back in the 80s were 5-inch feathers. They look good. They do an awesome job at steering and stabilizing the arrows, especially when you're shooting broadheads and you're shooting out of a higher poundage bow. And these days, if you're shooting a glass, recurve, or longbow, a lot of those brace heights are set between 6.5 and say 8.5. So there's plenty of room and clearance for your feather there. So you're not going to be rubbing this on your shelf. Again, it's going to be personal preference as to what you want to shoot. I suggest that you try various styles and see what flies best for you. Now, if you get into using full-length feathers, you can buy choppers to come up with a design or a size that you would like. Or if you really want to get into some different stuff, you can use a feather burner. That's what I use here in the shop, because with all the different varieties of feathers and shapes of feathers out there, I would have to have a ton of choppers, because the choppers are usually set by length. So they're either a 3-inch, a 4-inch, or a 5-inch chopper. Now some companies have changed that to where you can change the profile of them a little bit, and so they're getting a little better. But I personally, I like using a burner. I have a video on that if you want to check that out. But with a burner and that ribbon, the possibilities are infinite. You can come up with all different stuff, and you can adjust them for the length, the width, or whatever you'd like to do.
Where's Mom?
You want to say hi to everybody?
Hi. Where's Mom at?
I don't know. She's out somewhere.
See you later, everyone.
Okay, now I'm just going to give you a quick overview on some of the different fletching jigs that I've used throughout the years. I will do, if you guys want, I can do more in-depth videos on these, on how to set them up and some of the tips and tricks. But this is a Joe Jan multi-fletcher. They do sell this in the single version as well. I bought this one so that I could do 6 at a time to try to speed some things up. It does a pretty good job. It has been around for a while. These are held in, the clamps are held in just by pure gravity. So what you do is you load your arrows in. They do have knock receivers here. And the clamps, spring loaded. Now, Joe Jans do not have hash marks machined into the clamps. So what I did is I took an address sticker here and I marked where I wanted my feathers to end up at. And then I also took a permanent marker and I marked where the 4-inch, the 5-inch, and the 3-inch, just to make sure I could check both sides of the feather. Sometimes when you're buying bags of feathers, every once in a while, one of them will skip through the machine and it won't be a true 3-inch or 4-inch, and I don't want to find that out after I take the arrow out of the clamp and see that the glue has already dried and I have the wrong size of feather on there. So I always mark these to double check. Once I did that, I would also number the clamps per slot. So 1 through 6 on this. And then I made sure that that clamp always worked out of that same slot, so I had some consistency. These fall in the groove. and they just fall in there with gravity. It does really a pretty good job. Now the one advantage to the Jojan over the other Fletchers that I'll show you here shortly is it has a very minimal frame. No matter what you're fletching, whether you're fletching a right wing or a left wing, you can see your glue joint on these jigs. I can see the quill on this side, and by rotating to the other side, I can see the quill on the other side. So if you're going to be doing some butt splicing, or if you have some quills that you've ground down yourself where the quill might not be as uniform as you would like, that's where this jig really shines. These you can find in the US, you can find them retailing for about $110 for a 6 for the multi-fletcher. Okay, the next jig I'm going to talk about is the Bearpaw fletching jig. This is actually a really nice jig. It has a metal or a steel frame on there with some plastic attachment points that make up the jig. Where this one really shines versus the other ones, when you want to change from a 3 fletch, 4 fletch, or on this model even has a 6 fletch, all you have to do is slide this slide down till it clicks. And what that does is it changes the positions here of the catch, so on your knob it'll catch at different locations. Now the one drawback to this that I found is they don't really mark where those locations are, and sometimes if you're not careful you won't quite seat well. And so what I've done is I've taken a permanent marker and I put check marks on every one of those in different colors. So I use gold for 4, I use silver for 3. I also like the fact that the knock receiver is notched in there to accept the bigger style knock indexes, like on the Boning Classic. They actually slip right in there, and the knock is able to seat all the way down. The other nice thing about this is it has different, I don't know what you would call them, but what these do is they center up the shaft in here when it's being held. And so by simply removing this Allen wrench, you can swap it out for this smaller one for when you're doing the micro diameter carbon shafts, and they just slip in and out of there. So it's pretty well thought out. One thing you do have to be careful with is there's not a whole lot of room here between the base for the magnet and this feather lip. And when you're gluing your feather quill, sometimes if you get too much glue, it'll squish out and glue the clamp onto the arrow in a way, because the glue will dry in between there and it can be kind of hard to get off. And then these are hard to keep clean at times. So that would be my one drawback, or the one thing I wish Bearpaw would change on these. Okay, this is my all-time favorite fletching jig. This is a Bitzenberger fletching jig. It's been around for over 50 years now. It is a solid jig. They are a little expensive. They're $100 a piece, but they work forever, really. I've yet to wear one out. This is my original one that I bought with my own money when I was a kid. I mowed a lot of lawns and washed a lot of cars and did chores around and saved up for this one. I like them because they're infinitely adjustable. You can do all the way up from the skinniest micro diameter shafts all the way up to a 23/64, or even the fatter aluminums for tournaments and stuff. With these Allen wrenches here, you can loosen these knobs up and maneuver it for left to right helical. You can adjust how far offset you're going to make that helical to really make those feathers bite and rotate that shaft or that arrow as fast as they can. Replaceable nocks and stuff. So I will do a video on these. There are some modifications that I do to them to set them up for wood arrows. And then I'll show you how to dial them in to get them done right. So look forward to that one in the future. But now let's step into the fletching room and I'll show you how I actually put the feathers on my big fletching table in the back. Okay, so here are my fletching table. I've got 30 jigs on a Lazy Susan here, so I can really pump out some arrows. These are all Bitzenbergs. Some of them are some of the early ones that they had. Couple things about fletching jigs. No matter which one you buy, it's always a good idea to number, if you have multiple jigs, number your clamp to your jig. That way you always have consistency, you always have the same mark, and you'll get a much better product. But to apply a feather on, basically these have different settings on here. These are set up right now for a 3 fletch right helical. So these are all right wing feathers. Basically, I'm just going to put the feather in the clamp. I go up 3 lines on the clamp. For fletching glue, let's talk about that too real quick. I use Duco cement again, like I showed you in the knocking video. I put them in these little bottles right here with the metal tip. This gives me a very consistent, clean glue line, so I don't get gobs coming out or a bunch of air bubbles and stuff around my feathers. You can look at the arrows that I make, and on the feathers, you can see just a little bit of glue pushing out. So I'm getting good coverage around the quill, but there's not gobs of it on there. And it really, if you're going to spend all the time and make a really nice crown dip and cresting lines, there's no reason to destroy it with the sloppy glue job. So these little bottles here they're a game changer. The other thing is they don't keep running out. I have a problem with the tubes, and I don't really have one handy here, but the tubes have like a memory to them, so when you push on it, and maybe you get a little bit of a dry spot in there, so you have to press a little harder to get it going, then all of a sudden it comes out and it gets all over the place. That's why I don't like those. So what I do here is I get my feather in there. I will take my fingernail and make just a little bit of a gap between the clamp and the feather, so that when I put it down onto the shaft is actually what pushes that feather in there, and I know I have a good glue joint all the way through. So this is clamp number 6. So pop my needle out, and then I put my bead of glue all the way down. Put the back of the clamp into the base first, and then push this down all the way. Nice thing about working with a right helical on a Bitzenberg is you can actually see the quill all the way down, so I can look at that. And after doing this for a while, I do have to put my reading glasses on, but I can see that I have a nice glue line all the way on that arrow shaft. Now, if you have a little tip for you, if you're not sure, or you have a piece that's kind of up, I have just a really thin Phillips screwdriver here that I can put on there, and I can run that down the quill and get a real nice attachment that way. And so that way I know I have a nice perfect glue line. There's no humps, there's no bubbles, and that feather will not come off. The Duco cement holds it down. Now the Duco has a 5-minute clamp time, so it can sit in here for 5 minutes, and then I will rotate over to the other one. I usually don't shoot them for about 24 hours. You might be able to do it sooner than that, but I haven't tried. And when you have a table set up like this, when I have this table full, I can start at number 1 and go all the way through. Now I have 24 of these jigs set up for right helical, and then I've got 6 set up for left. So when I'm doing 2 dozen rights, I can start at number 1, go all the way around, and then come right over to number 1 again and rotate the feather. So rotate it, just take your clamp off, rotate it till it falls in the other notch, and then I put my second color, or the color for the hen feathers, and stick it in there. Last thing I do, and the same thing I do with the Duco, is I will put a dab of glue or a glue tack on the front of every feather, and then I will also do it on the back. And again, this is where the metal tip point comes on here. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed the series on Wood Arrow Making 101. This is the last episode. Putting on the feathers is the final step in making the arrow. Once you put the glue tack on stuff on there. I already have a video out there on how to put on your points and broadheads, so check that one out. But if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And subscribe to the channel. I have some other videos coming up. My next one I'm going to try to put out is on what dynamic spine is and all the different things you can do to your arrow to affect it for tuning, and so you guys can get the right spine for your longbows and your recurves. If there's anything particular you want to see, leave me a comment, shoot me an email, and let me know. And you can also contact me through the website, addictivearchery.com. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this series as much as I did making it.